Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth, and today we're going to talk about Claire's experience with self-grading. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week was good. This is our spring break week right now, which I'm super excited about. And Ralph and I have been doing a lot of spring cleaning. And one of the fun things is we went through all of our books and decided which ones we didn't need. And we have so many books.
Oh my God,
and
yeah.
Ralph, we were looking at the pile of books that we were getting rid of, and we were like, now I understand that we buy a lot of books, but how could it possibly be this many books? So it's just a good reminder. But it's fun to see the pile of books that we've read.
Are you bringing them to the secondhand bookstore?
Yes.
Okay, good, yeah, because then you know what you can do? You buy some more books. So it's dangerous.
Perfect.
Yeah, it just keeps you hooked in the game. You can't get out. Like you keep going. So when you spring clean, do you like pick a room and you're like, this is the room we're doing today? Or
That's exactly what we do.
Okay,
That's exactly
I like
what we
it.
do. We kind of you know what, I find this really helpful too, is we pick like a corner and start there and then like rotate around clockwise until we get to the other corner so that you don't be like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. You're just like, this is the next thing. What do we want this thing? You know?
Yeah, I have a terrible habit of like pulling everything out and then being like, oh no, like this, I really regret this decision.
Right, because
So
there's so many books.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
I told you our stuff arrived and I'm like, where is this going to go? Because the house is full.
Gosh.
So
you already had a full house and then your stuff arrived from America.
so many books, so many books. It's ridiculous. So yeah.
So how was your week?
My week was great. I think I mentioned on here that I have tried going swimming in the sea.
Oh, yes.
And it's so addictive. It's very addictive. I feel like I keep being like, oh, okay, we'll go. And then maybe we'll go next week. And then we're like, what if we go in 2 days? And I feel like it's just all of these ladies there. Because the place we go, there's like separate bathing areas.
Okay.
And we just go to the ladies one.
So there's a whole zone of the beach that's separate ladies only swimming.
It's actually
zone?
like this pier. Like it's a long kind of, it's called the Bull Wall. And it's like this long rocky pier. And so there's steps from the pier down to the sea. And there's like a little shelter that you can get changed in.
Wow.
Which I don't know how, it's some weird optical illusion where it's not a very deep shelter, but somehow no one can see anything. It's magical, yeah. So, but there's just all of these women who all look kind of bewildered that they keep coming back to. Because like one lady's like, I've been doing this for 20 years. And she's like looks like I'm as baffled as you are. But it's really, yeah, it's very addictive.
Wow. That
don't know
sounds
why.
like something magical going on with just like the allure of the sea is bringing you all back over and over.
I asked my foster sister a text and I was like, is this how people become selkies? Like, do people just stop getting back out of the sea? But
yes.
We did get like neoprene gloves and socks.
Ooh.
And that made a big difference.
Now, are you also wearing wetsuits?
No, none of them are.
So just the socks and the hands.
Well, like swimsuit, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. But nothing else for warmth.
No, and there's like these like 80-year-old ladies just marching into the sea. And I feel like it's given me a perspective. So the sea temperature is about 8 degrees Celsius.
That's cold.
I know, it is cold. It's very cold. But like, weirdly, this is peak coldness now.
Okay.
Apparently at Christmas it's slightly warmer. Do you know, I think it takes longer for the sea to change temperature, so it's a bit out of phase with the seasons. Okay. But then, you know, you always hear about Titanic and they say, oh, the water was 4 degrees Celsius. And I was like, okay, it didn't have any sense. And now I'm like, oh, that's
very cold.
Yeah, and I barely manage, like we just submerge and then get back out again. But it's super addictive. Like, it's very bizarre. So I love it, for sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What a fun thing.
It's sort of like the first time I was like embarrassed. So we went really, really early. Because I was like, I don't want anyone to see me. And then once you're there, you're like, oh, no one is looking at anybody's, like, you know, what they look like in a swimsuit. That is not what we're doing here. So, yeah, crazy. So I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's
sounds
very
fun.
addictive though. Yeah. You feel like
Well,
$1 million afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I ever come visit you in Ireland, I want
Oh
to
my
go.
God. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Come and do some ocean chemistry over here.
Yeah, that's a
sure.
great idea.
It is.
I need to figure out what I can do in Ireland.
Totally.
Okay. Love it.
Yeah.
Next proposal.
We'll bring our test tubes down to this ladies' bathing area. That would be great. But yeah.
So, do you have a quote for us today?
I do have a quote, and it's sort of to do with things are feeling quite grim in the world. Do you know what I mean? So it's and definitely I guess being in Europe now when this is happening feels like it's sort of intense. And we had there was a student who was in Ukraine who got rescued by some people, and it's sort of been this dramatic thing that people have been tuning into every day. And I think so. I'm going back to Lord of the Rings because always, and I just want to have a caveat here. I'm not sure this is from the text of Lord of the Rings, or I know it's from the movie, but I'm not totally sure it's from the text also.
Okay.
But it's
good caveat.
When things are looking grim in Helm's Deep and Aragorn says, there is always hope. And I'm like, that's true. Things are going to get better. It just, it doesn't always feel like it right now, but they will. They will.
That's a good reminder. And things got really grim in The Lord of the Rings. And
they did. Like as grim as they could
worked out.
possibly get.
Yeah.
And they still all did the right things and marched on Mordor, even though they didn't think it was going to work out. So, yeah, I'm not saying we should do that, but whatever that looks like for us, maybe it involves getting in the sea. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's So we're doing a bit of a different type of episode today.
Yes.
Where I'm interviewing a very prestigious guest called Claire, and because Claire has tried out something really exciting, and I have about 10,000 questions about it. And so I'm going to interview Claire about her experience with self-grading for an exam.
Yes.
So yeah.
And we were talking about this because I was like, oh, I can't wait to tell you about this and what happened on my week. And then I was like, this is going to be too long. And Ruth was like, what if I just interview you? So anyway, that's what we're doing. Yeah.
So actually, before we even start with where did this come from? Where did you get the idea for this?
I got this idea from former Professor Podcast co-host Blaise Thompson, and who at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I understand that their chemistry department does this quite regularly, and so he told me the idea, and then I said, that sounds pretty cool, and I gave it a shot.
Cool. Okay, so tell me the setup. So tell me what kind of class this was. Like, is this first years or not quite first years, or how did it set up? And is this replacing, but it's not the word I'm looking for, but was this a midterm exam?
Yes. So this was a midterm exam. And it's my upper division, 400 level. A lot of these people are about to graduate in a semester or two class. And it's called Instrumental Analysis. A variety of majors, mostly chemistry majors, but also some oceanography, geology, a few other things. Small. I've got maybe 17 students. And the way it worked was I gave them a take-home exam, so they had a whole week to work on it. It was honor code, working individually. They had to sign a little thing saying they worked individually. And then, so after they had it for a week, they brought physical copies of their answers to all the questions to class. I gave them each a red pen, and so they had their answers and their notes if they wanted them, and this red pen. And then the idea was we would spend the whole lecture day when we might have been the day that I normally designated for taking an exam in class. Instead, we were going to use that day for going over the exam answers.
Oh, wow.
And so the students, I put on the board numbers 1 through 5, and then 5 volunteers came up and wrote out their answers for 1 through 5, or, each student wrote one answer. And I tried to make it low stakes, so I was like, you don't have to put your whole answer, just get us started, or if you want to put your whole answer, whatever you want to, but we're trying to get us started on a discussion of the question, and in the end, the goal of today is by the end of today, we're going to have full correct answers for all the questions on the board through discussions, So everybody wrote an answer, and then once, those 5 volunteers sat back down, I said, okay, let's start with question 1, so-and-so. Will you talk us through your answer? And they talked us through the answer. And then I said, okay, can anyone think of anything to add or change to this answer? And then we had a discussion. And it was a very lively discussion. People saying, well, I did almost the same thing, but over here I did this other thing. Or,
wow.
And then,
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So did you pick people to put their answers on the board? You hadn't seen their tests, so you had literally
hadn't
no
seen their
idea.
tests.
Okay, so you weren't picking necessarily a correct.
No, I
Okay.
wasn't. I mean,
Got
they
it.
probably self-picked, I assume, questions
Yeah.
they felt more
If you're
confident
like
on.
didn't write anything, you just go and volunteer to stand up. But okay, so
Yeah.
the key thing there is they volunteered.
They volunteered,
Okay.
and I only had a total of 10 questions and 17 students, so not everybody wrote an answer down. So it was up to them if they wanted to.
I think that's great. Yeah. So they picked ones they felt reasonably confident.
I think
about.
so. Yeah. And we built on it, So some people did have incorrect answers up there, or at least lots of people had incomplete answers, and a few people had incorrect, answers. But we built on it, So we'd start out with whatever that person thought. Somebody would say, "Oh, what about this diagram? I think this diagram would be useful." We'd draw the diagram on the board, and then someone would say, "Okay, so I think the key thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is this aspect about the diagram," and then we'd eventually, and I'd kind of add as things came up that should be in the answer that weren't in the answer. I would add them to the board just to like complete out the answer.
Okay, so I'm with you, right? So now we have this discussion happens, and they're going to write down and then sort of have the perfect solution through
Yes.
this discussion. Okay, where does the grading part come in?
Okay, so after each question, I told them to score themselves. Simple rubric. I wrote the rubric on the board. 3, I got it perfectly right. 2, minor mistake. 1, major mistake. 0, did not attempt. And I got this rubric from Blaze as well. So it's, there aren't that many choices of grades. So it's, it wasn't too hard. There are ambiguous cases, but it's pretty as easy as grading can be, I think.
Yeah.
So they would write themselves. So with their red pens, they're taking notes on their test about whatever things they didn't include in their answer that they should have included, or whatever was wrong or something. And then they're also just writing a little number next to it for whether they think they got 0, 1, 2, or 3.
Okay. Okay, so then you did a batch of 5.
Yes.
And then
we erased that and did the other batch of 5.
Okay. Okay, so then at the end, did you gather up their tests and you submitted
Yes.
the grade? Okay.
Exactly. So at the end, they handed all their tests in with all their everything. And so the red pen was stuff that they had written on, after the test was due. And so I didn't count that as correct answers. But this was so easy to grade. It was incredibly fast. Now, I still went through and double-checked. A lot of times somebody would write a 2, and I was like, oh, well, I think that's really a 3. That's a minuscule error, Or,
Isn't that funny how I wonder, was it more likely that people would underestimate than overestimate?
It varied. There was definitely one test where I boosted somebody's grade on one question and lowered their grade on another question, and it all added up to the same amount. But then there were a couple people where, like, overall they were a little hard on themselves, or someone else was a little easy on themselves. So, but I didn't change that many. So that was part of why it was easier, was because they already had a draft grade written there. But the real reason it was so much easier and so much faster to grade was because they had already written notes about what they got wrong on the question. So I didn't feel like... I did write some notes if I felt like they had missed something, or if I wanted to clarify a point. I wrote a few things. But the fact that I didn't have to write something for every single thing that was wrong just made it... it was an order of magnitude faster to grade this test. I handed it back the same day in lab. Everybody was amazed. It was so fun. But it took me like 2 hours.
This has been a documented journey for you about, like, just the frustration with grading time, and now finally we've hit on the thing.
Yes, it was incredible. It was great all around. So
okay, I have to be honest. So I've been having Captain Skepticism.
Okay, tell me Captain Skepticism.
No, but I'm over it now. So once you said,
wow.
I finally understand. So I get why you had them do it in red pen.
Yes.
And then that you did check it afterwards, and you're submitting the grade. So they're not just like, sure, I got 100%. They're like,
no, yeah.
Okay.
I go through and I leave little notes.
But that's genius too, that it's the red pen. So then you can clearly see what they did. Mm-hmm. And did you have to go and, like, slap a pencil out of someone's hand, or was anybody... like...
So, yeah, I was wondering about that. I gave everybody the red pens, I feel like I wasn't as strict as I could have been. I could have been like, the only thing on your desk is the red pen and your answers, and if you want, your notes from class. I didn't really say that. I think if I had a bigger class or a class of students that I trusted less, maybe I would. But with only 17, and there are all these upper division ones that I know really well, and I can see the room pretty well, so I did glance around periodically and make sure everybody was using the red pens. So I wasn't really worried about that. But one could be a little bit more absolutely strict about exactly what can be on your desk, and I think get around that without an issue.
Yeah, okay, so so my next question then was kind of about quality control, but I think you've already talked about that, like you went through and manually kind of checked
and
them.
all I did was like cross out their 2 and write a 1 or whatever it might be, you know?
Okay, so then the other thing is, have you compared this to like a usual, so I guess there's 2 things. One is like, was it harder because it's a take-home test? Like, how would it compare to your usual exam, which was normally like a timed in-class thing, right?
I've done so many different versions for this class. Originally, when I took the class from, the person who'd been teaching it before me, he had his exams were half take-home and half in-class. And so I did that for a couple years, and then we had the pandemic, and then I made it fully take-home for a year, and then I made it fully online, like short questions that you answer time. So I've done lots of formats for this class. So I guess the answer is I don't feel like I have a go-to test for this class that I was changing. But I tried to make it questions, like a combination of questions. Some of them were pretty much things that we talked about that they needed to look through their notes or remember. And some of the questions were things that we talked about, but in a little bit more depth. So they had to go read a little bit more or learn a little bit more than we had. And I told them explicitly that the goal of the take-home test was to be a learning experience. And so I was hoping that as they went through and found all the answers, they would be learning something that they had missed along the way, or they would be learning it to more depth or something like that. And so by the time they got to the in-class time when we were going to discuss all the answers, hopefully they would have gotten more depth out of the material at that point. And then maybe they got like 90% understanding on one question and someone else had a different 90%, and together by the end of our discussions they'd both have 100% understanding of that question. So I told them all those goals. I will say this class is heavily lab-based, so I feel like the exams are a little bit less important than maybe in some other classes. So I wasn't too worried about trying something radically different. Because
I love that. I feel like this is such a cool experience because, well, like you said, you had trust with these students, and then it's not the entire grade, but then also like how cool for them. Do you know what I mean? Right. To be like, we're actually like just about to graduate now, and this is what we're like shifting into, and it just sounds like such a. Did you ever see college experiences on TV? Like, there's some program I used to watch. I feel like it was like they were all in law school and everyone was always discussing things, and it just seemed like this super dynamic. And I was like, ooh, that's what college is going to be like. So it just feels like that. And it's not the same thing at all. But I really remember in my primary school when I finally got to the last year, instead of using like whatever, we would now have these binders, and I was like, I am the most sophisticated.
Now I'm at the binder level. Yeah.
And so like that's super cool. Okay.
I do feel like the discussions were really exciting. Like they were animated, like somebody would say, no, but shouldn't it be this way? And someone else is like, no, because of this. And then it was like all back and forths, and because they had really just spent a long time and a lot of effort
really invested
on
in
this
that
exam.
Problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Because it was an exam.
Cool.
It wasn't just a random problem that I posed to them. They had spent time getting their answers, and now they're hearing more thoughts about these things. So it was really a great moment for learning, for them to really think about it more. And one guy, like after class, he followed me back to my office and demanded an answer about this electrochemistry concept that he just realized he didn't understand. And
if you actually recognize that that's what the exam is for.
Right, exactly. And if you just hand in an exam and then get your grade, maybe you realize that. Maybe you'd have a similar response, but I don't think it'd be as likely to have such a realization that, oh my goodness, I don't understand this concept. What is going on? Let me figure this out. So that was exciting.
Yeah, I love, because I feel like I can't really articulate this quite yet. It's going to take some digestion time. But for me, my major experiences have been with take-home exams, like where you just are like obsessed with these questions. And I feel like there's something that like truncates after that. And I feel like this is what really brings it to a close nicely. Do you know what I mean? Like you're
I think so.
Yeah, I love this.
Okay,
Okay,
and I had,
so
just one more thing about the student response. 3 out of my 17 students just individually and spontaneously told me that they found this a really good experience for learning. And one of them also said she thought it was lower stakes. And I was like, why would that be? Because I was kind of afraid I was making it higher stakes since we were having to discuss these answers in class. But she said, leaving the exam, she already knew kind of what she got right and what she got wrong. So she wasn't scared about what's the verdict going to be when the test grade comes back. So that was kind of interesting. So not only, like, I feel like it was really helpful for them to really engage with the material right at that moment when they'd spent so much time on these questions. And they seemed to think that too. And then it also didn't, it seemed she thought it was lower stakes and more relaxing. So that's great too.
Do you know what's funny is, like, I wonder also how much could it impact what you know, the whole thing where people are like, everyone else knows how to do everything and I'm the only person who doesn't know how to do it.
That's a good point.
Like, I wonder, just hearing people articulate, no, but I thought it was this because of this, or, you know what I mean? Like, that must be really illuminating for the students.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Hear about. That's really cool. Okay, so tell me though, like, did you look at the average? Was it, I mean, I know you said you don't have like a hard and fast average, but did you, like, did it skew particularly one way or the other?
No, it seemed very reasonable. You know, I had a bunch of A's and B's, a few C's, and then a few F's, and that's pretty normal for this class. You know, like it was what you'd kind of expect based on how people had been doing in their lab reports and stuff like that. So, you know, as usual, there's a few exceptions where somebody was doing well on one thing and less well on another thing, but it was all very normal. So I didn't. Yeah, when I got to the actual grades, I was like, oh, this is pretty much the same. And in fact, a note on grading, I had been thinking, you know, we did this 3-2-1 thing, and I had been thinking, oh, I don't know, is a 2, like, should I count that as 2 points out of 3 possible points? Because that seems kind of like a harsh, you made a minor mistake, and now you're all the way down at 2/3 of the points. So I had been thinking I might make a 2 like an 80% or something like that. And so I was planning to do this complicated thing, but in the end, when I just did it, you know, there were 30 total possible points because there were 10 questions and each one was 3 points, and we just added them up and did the math, just normal division, you know, 27 points out of 30 or whatever. That actually was a perfectly reasonable grade distribution, and I ended up just adding 3 points to everyone's grade because the high score in the class got a 29 out of 30, so I just made that a 30 out of 30, and the distribution was great. So then I was like, okay, I won't do anything complicated.
That's so cool. Okay, here's my next question.
Okay.
How much did the students know before they came into the room how this was going to go?
Sure. I mean, I tried to tell them most everything. But of course, they weren't used to it, so they probably didn't understand it fully. But I tried to explain, like, when I handed out the test, I said, okay, you're going to have a week to work on this. I definitely, like, on the test itself, it said, come to class on Wednesday with your physical answers, be prepared to discuss them with the class, you know, so I tried to make sure that they knew all that was going to happen. But I'm sure that it was new and they didn't know all the ins and outs until we were there. Like, I didn't tell them about the red pens and stuff like that until I handed them out. And I told them there'd be a simple rubric they'd score themselves on, but I didn't give them the rubric until we were there.
That all seems reasonable, though. Yeah,
so I tried to give them all the information they needed to, like, to be emotionally prepared to talk about it, you know? Yeah.
Okay, and then what would you do differently next time? And then a side question to that, would you extend this to classes that are, like, earlier in the sequence? And if you did, would you do it differently? Okay.
Great question. So, the one thing that I would definitely try to do a little bit better on the next exam for this class, which we're going to do the same format, was doing a little bit better job of moderating the timing of the discussion. Like, we ended up spending like 40 minutes on the first 5 questions and then only 10 minutes on the last 5 questions, which I could have done a better job. I kind of thought the first question of the exam was going to be one of the ones we spent more time on, so I didn't worry that we were spending so long on it, because I thought, oh, well, the next 3 questions are going to be gimmies, we'll be done. But though they had a lot of discussion about the next 3 questions too, so anyway, I just need to, be more systematic about how much time we have for each question. And then I was also thinking, like, kind of the way it was very interactive in terms of the discussion, and I wondered, but it wasn't very interactive in terms of who was writing on the board. Like, I had my 10 volunteers who wrote their answers, but after they sat back down, they were just sitting. They were having a discussion, and I was adding to the board as the discussion progressed. So I was wondering at first whether I wanted to make it a little bit more like more people keep coming up and adding answers to the board, but I kind of don't think so. I think I want to keep it the way I did it, because I really like that the students start off the discussion and put their answers on the board, and then they were having a lively discussion, and so that's good. And then I like keeping it me adding the additional answers just to make sure that we have a really nice, solid answer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For sure.
So I'm going to keep that the same. So then you asked about whether I would do it for other classes, and that's a great question. I was wondering that. I feel like, so this is the second level of analytical chemistry, smaller class, more senior students. I wonder whether I would want to do it for the first level of analytical chemistry. I think I would try it, but the concerns I have, a larger class, so I'd have to be a little bit more careful about making sure that I'm being fair in terms of it being easy to, you have to use this red pen and you only have so many notes out and that kind of stuff. My other concern is that in the first level, I do find the exams really important, which is a funny argument because I do think this new version is a better version of exams in terms of student learning. So if I find exams more important, you would think, well, I should definitely do this new version of self-grading in the lower division class, but I'm just a little worried about temporary fallout during the implementation procedure. But I think it would be worth it. Like I will make a couple mistakes as I'm learning how to do it, but overall I think it'll be worth. So yes, I do want to do it.
Could you imagine a scenario where you do this with this group a few times and then really get it down? And then,
yeah, maybe.
And I think it's like, because just even when you're saying that, I feel like there's different material requires different approaches.
Yes,
and so I don't
too.
think that's crazy.
I don't think that's crazy. Yeah. And I think you could do this with an in-class exam, and I might want to do that for the lower level class, where we do an in-class exam one day, and then the next day do the discussion and going over it. The only problem there is it takes 2 lecture periods instead of 1.
Yeah.
But that's okay if it's really worth it. So I don't know. I think there'll be a few tweaks that I need to do for the class that I know less well, where there's more people and they're at a lower level of their college experience. But I do think it's doable, and I would like to try it.
I'm so glad we talked about this, because I was like, I don't know, Claire. But this is super cool. I love many things about it. Like, one thing even is just the fact that the students have a complete solution. Do you know what I mean? I think that's super important, but they're not just reading it, like they're invested in creating it. That seems really, really relevant. And then just a sense of autonomy and trust. And I love it. It seems really, and the fact that then, because it's take home, they're getting a lot more invested in these questions. But then there's like, I don't know, I can't articulate this properly, but there's something not satisfying about just reading a solution after you've been like obsessed with this thing all week. And so, maybe battling it out courtroom style. I don't know why I was obsessed with that show, but that's super cool. I'm really into this. You should totally present on this somewhere. I think this is such a cool, I mean, you just did here, but elsewhere, other venues. This is super cool.
I'm into it. I'm looking forward to seeing. So we have 2 exams in this class. This was the first one. I'm excited to see if it goes as well in the second one. But so far it just seems like a win-win-win, and I don't even see a downside. So
that's so
the students
cool.
get more time with the material. They're really invested with the material. Then they have their answers. It just seems great.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.